So welcome everybody. Today's meeting of Southwark Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Kieran Williams, Leader of the Council and Chair of this meeting. I shall first start by introducing our Cabinet members. So I'm just going to go around the room and start with Steph.
Hi, I'm Councillor Stephanie Cryan, Cabinet Member for Council Homes and Homelessness.
Councillor Jason Autry, Cabinet Member for Business, Jobs and Town Centres.
Councillor Evelyn Okoto, Cabinet Member for Public Health and Wellbeing.
Hi everyone, I'm Councillor Jasmine Ali, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Education.
I'm Councillor Alice MacDonald, Cabinet Member for Equalities, Neighbourhoods and Leisure.
And Councillor Rebecca Laurie will be joining us shortly, and we have apologies from Councillor Darren Merrill, Councillor Catherine Rose and Councillor Helen Dennis for COVID-related reasons is trying to join us remotely. In fact, I think is behind me as this room is configured. Won't be recorded as being here because of the rules around local authority meetings, but is here in spirit and person and to take questions on items. So this meeting will be live streamed. I ask members of the audience here in the room to wait until I invite them to come in if they have questions. Primarily this is a meeting in public, so I will be asking questions of Cabinet members and those presenting. But please wait for me to invite you in. Filming is allowed of our council meetings, but please do that considerately. And please, if you haven't already, turn your phones to silent. I see everybody shuffling to grab their phones now, as we all do at that moment. I'm going to go on to the minutes of our previous meeting. Are Cabinet members happy to agree that they're a correct record of the previous meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Deportation requests. We've had a number of deportation requests this morning about the Bankside Yards paper. We have, for those deputations, offered meetings with council officers to discuss the detail of them and correspondence with our legal teams for some that were raised directly by legal representatives. So we won't be receiving those today, but we will be looking in detail at the issues that they have raised, and I've asked officers to make sure they respond to them in full, and indeed there is an addendum to the papers today that seeks to do that. So that takes us on to the sorry, I should ask, have we got any disclosures of interest or dispensations that Cabinet members need to make this morning? No, and we've not received any public questions this morning. So that takes us to the first item on the agenda, which is the housing revenue account. So I'll ask Steph to introduce that and officers presenting to come up as well.
Thank you, Chair. So every year we agree the housing revenue account. It's the ring-fence budget for the housing department, and within that budget we set the annual rent and service charges for the next financial year. It also sets out our priorities and commitments within the housing department for that next financial year as well. What we're recommending in terms of rent increase is that we take the full amount of CPI plus 1%, which is the maximum increase that we can take, which would be 4.1%. I do want to stress that actually I've had conversations with colleagues across London around that, and it seems to be that most London boroughs are looking at CPI plus 1% of 4.1. So we're not an outlier here. We're in line with a lot of other local authorities in that. And I think it's really important to stress that if we don't take the full 4.1%, it really severely hinders what we can do within the housing budget on our delivery of new homes, on our repair service, on major works as well. So although it is quite a sharp increase, it just, you know, it still doesn't cover everything that we need. We still do need to look at borrowing as well within that. Some of the big commitments that we're making within this, we're looking to put £1 million into improving our repair service. I think when you look at the consultation that was done with residents, the online consultation and the in-person one that we did last week, the repair service came up quite a lot, and there is, you know, people do feel that, you know, if they're paying more into their rents and service charge, they would like to see some sort of benefit from that through the repair service. So we've made a commitment to put another £1 million into repairs. I think, as we've spoken before, building safety is of paramount importance. The building safety bill is working its way through Parliament at the moment. There will be more sort of onus on the council for how we sort of respond to that as well. So we've absolutely set aside commitments in the building safety of 7.1 million. And something that we've put in since the indicative report, because last month we agreed the indicative report before we went out to consultation, is that we've agreed to look at a pilot to see how we can provide tenancy sustainment advice and support for residents. So we're working through what that would look like in the back of a really great report that came from a working group of tenants and leaseholders that looked at what the effect that COVID and the pandemic had on tenants' rents and their arrears. So we've made a firm commitment to look at what support we can give in terms of tenancy sustainment, which has come between now and the last report as well. In terms of the consultation events, the online consultation event ran for, I think, just under 4 weeks. We got 58 results on that. Unsurprisingly, the vast majority was around people were upset about the increase in the rent and service charges. I want to stress the service charge is the actual cost, so we're not it's actually we're raising it by what it actually costs us to provide that service. There were concerns about, obviously, with other cost of living increases like fuel bills and that it might be too much. I just wanted to reassure that anybody who's on local housing allowance, the rents will still be covered on that. And actually, we're still at a situation where the 1% decrease in rents every year has actually meant that we're still behind where we would have been had that not been the case. If we'd have increased rents in line every year between 2016 and 2020 with CPI, we'd be looking at an average rent of about £121. As it stands, we're looking at just over £108 a week average rent. So we've still got a way to catch up within that. But it is covered for anybody with local housing allowance on that. In terms of the in-person meeting, that was a little bit more nuanced. It was more that people took the opportunity to explain issues and concerns they have on their estates or with services rather than the actual proposed increases in rent and service charges, and we've taken those on board and promised full responses to residents on that. So there has been quite a lot of consultation done within that. But I think following that, although we know some people are worried about cost of living increase and absolutely understand that, to be able to provide the services that we need to have a repair service that's fit for purpose, to ensure that we're meeting our commitments to building safety and all the other things, new homes and everything else, just the day-to-day running of the housing services, we have to take the full increase, and that's what's been recommended in this report.
Thank you, Steph. Ian, would you like to add anything to that?
I don't think there is anything to add. Just out of interest, and it's of no help to tenants. If we were looking at CPI as of today, November's CPI was 5.1, 2% higher than what CPI was in September, and obviously the 1% on top. So it'd be 6.1% increase if we were going with November's figures. December is out tomorrow, likely to be even higher. If we'd had the extra 2% in rental income, that would have generated another 3.6 million net. And clearly we could have used that for services, but obviously the impact on residents would be more harsh.
Thank you. In terms of how we've changed the proposals in response to residents, you've obviously talked about the investment in housing repairs, but what else have we done to make sure that this budget is in directly response to priorities for our residents?
So I think repairs was the big thing that came out. The other thing that did come out was major works. And I think, as you said, we've put those priorities in there, the £1 million and the 7.1, because with the building safety, there will be major works within that. And those were the two main things. But in terms of the cost of living, I think that commitment to look at how we can look at tenancy sustainment will help support that as well. And it's really important that we work through what that looks like. We are re-looking at the advice services that are provided as part of the Resident Involvement Review report that we agreed at Cabinet 2 years ago now, and looking at those types of services. And absolutely we can look at how we can procure things, those services that residents have asked for within that as well. So I think there's work to do to look at what it could look like, but we've got the option to go out to procurement and tender to tender those services to help support people in that. I just think the tenancy sustainment is so important, especially because it's not just going to be rents, it is going to be, we're seeing a massive increase in fuel bills, which is really going to impact on people as well on it, and just the general cost of living increases as well. So we'll do what we can to alleviate it where possible on that, but I just don't think we've got any option but to increase the rents by CPI +1 at the moment.
Thank you. I had a further response and I'll come back to you, Jason.
Just to answer your question, Councillor Williams, there is a specific and new recommendation in the report, which is recommendation 6, which sets out the agreement to run with the pilot project that Councillor Crine mentioned in her introduction. So that's a specific change to the indicative report from December.
Thank you, that's very helpful to hear. Jason?
Yeah, it was just a question on the inflationary pressures, and with inflation kind of rising and with anticipated levels of inflation to rise by tomorrow, What CPI figure are we using? Is it one from November, or are we going to adopt the one as of tomorrow when those figures come out?
It's a September CPI figure.
Okay.
So that's what's in the regulations in terms of rent setting.
Which is positive for residents.
It is.
Yeah. And
just to check in how our rents compare now. So Steph, I think you said they're about £108 per week. How does that compare with other social landlords in the city?
We're about 8th lowest. So we absolutely are still, although, and we will continue to be, because as I said, I think, the 4.1 increase is going to be universal across the piece, more or less. On that, I also think it's really important to stress, if we didn't take the full rent thing, if at any time I needed to go to government to say we needed more funding, they could push back and say, well, you have the opportunity to do that through rent increases. If we've risen it to the maximum and also then still need to lobby or make representations, it puts us in a strong position. But because the colleagues I've spoken to across London are saying they're actually, again, feel they've got no choice but to do this, it still puts us at 8th lowest, I think, around 8th, 9th lowest in London.
And that's 8th lowest out of councils?
Yeah, of councils. I think in housing associations, council rents are traditionally lower than housing association rents.
Any further questions on this paper? I mean, clearly any increase at the moment is always hard for people, but we're trying to juggle here, making sure we can maintain our homes and keep bringing them up to higher standards for people, and whether it's improving the repair service or making sure that all buildings are safe. Those things are clearly need investment, and obviously it's a very good thing that in the centre of London we have council housing with such low rents, but we only have rents to cover the cost of doing all of that work, and hence the need to increase rents to make sure we can afford to provide the services that I know residents expect and want from the council. That being the case, are people happy to agree this paper? Agreed. So we have recommendations 1 to 8. Yep. Okay. Agreed. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for all the work on this. I know there's a huge amount of work goes into putting together these budgets each year, and that's greatly appreciated. Thank you. Can
I just come and say that Ian and Sean work around the clock, because they get the latest amendment came in yesterday morning, and they've been working around the clock to get this balance to really work so hard, as they do every year for it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Good to get there, and also my thanks to all the residents who got involved in working with us to get this budget right as well. Okay, that takes us on to the next paper, which is the Policy and Resources Strategy for the next year, 22-23. Rebecca, if you'd like to introduce that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So,
if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Councillor Rebecca Leary. I'm Cabinet Member for Finance, Performance and Democracy. This report follows the report that we had in December, setting out the latest version of the budget for 22-23. Since the last version of the report, we've now had the provisional local government settlement, so we have ended up in a slightly more favourable position than we anticipated. So whilst the December report showed a budget gap of £6 million, we've been able to reduce that in this report down to £1.6 million. Work is still continuing to close that gap ahead of the final budget going to Council Assembly, which will take place at the end of February 2022. There are also a number of other minor amendments in the report, but nothing substantial, and this report will now go to overview and scrutiny for their session on the 24th of January. We will take their further recommendations and the work that we're doing to close that gap before we bring the final report to February's Cabinet on the 1st. Duncan or Tim, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Thanks to all colleagues as ever for all the work that's gone into this so far. We're not quite there yet. We still have some more fine tuning to get through, and clearly scrutiny next Monday is very important. And I think there's also an Equalities Board meeting, which is either immediately before or immediately afterwards, that will be important. There's still bits of work being completed around the edges, but I guess the headlines in this budget are, thankfully, we didn't get an unreasonable grant settlement for 22-23 from government. It was better than expected, which means that we've effectively moved a projection in June or July last year of a 19 million savings target, and I think we have savings in this budget of about 9. So that's an indication of some of the benefits coming through that settlement. However, I've just got to put the caveats out there again. There's a lot of ring fence money in this government funding, particularly for adult social care, for obvious reasons. We're not clear yet on what the new burdens will be coming through the system that go with that. And clearly, as we come out of COVID, there will be a whole backlog of health cases that are going to actually kind of start moving through into local government services as well. There's a lot of one-off money that is not guaranteed for 23-24. And I think it's big job for us, I think, over the next year is to continue lobbying for the need for those resources, particularly as we move into the potential threat of fair funding, which is likely to redistribute settlement money across the country. And more importantly for us, the business rate reset, which has again been delayed, thank goodness, but that serves to penetrate our business rate growth item, which is about £17 million in the 22-23 budget, but that is still in grave danger subject to that reset. So they're the headlines, I think, Leader.
Thank you. And I mean, as ever, the government get these settlements out at the very last minute, just before Christmas. So my thanks to all the work that's happened since then to try and understand what a very complex set of papers that come out really mean for us and the finances we have. As you say, this is better than expected, but it's still not good. And it follows over a decade now of more and more money being taken out of the government's support for residents in our borough. And as you say, there was an awful lot of uncertainty about what comes next, and uncertainty that has incredibly high risks for the services in our borough. Are there any questions that people would like to ask on this budget? Obviously, we've discussed this before, and we'll be discussing it again, and not least at full council when we finally approve a budget. My thanks in advance to OSC for the work they'll do on Monday in helping us go through the detail here. We'll be continuing also to strengthen the Equalities Impact Assessment work to make sure that we've really worked through the detail of that, and the Climate Impact Assessment work as well, which we are doing alongside. So if there are no questions for now, which is understandable because we've talked about this on a number of occasions, are we happy to agree the recommendations in this report, which are recommendations 1 to 13, lots of recommendations. Agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so that takes us on to the next paper, which is the future of the Aylesbury estate. If I could invite up officers who want to present on that item. And Steph, would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, of course. This is a report which we have got the open item, but we'll be agreeing in closed session as well. So we'll be coming back to it a little bit later on within that closed session. But this is about the future of the Aylesbury estate, which is our largest redevelopment estate in the borough, and really, really important that we get this right for the residents who live on the estate and those who wish to return to the Aylesbury. In 2014, as we all know, the council signed a development partnership agreement with Notting Hill Genesis to redevelop the Aylesbury. In the 8 years since then, I think a lot's happened. I think in 2014 we weren't in a position to be able to sort of do the things we do now. I think we've since we signed the original partnership agreement, we've declared a climate emergency, so we absolutely have to look at how we can make our homes as green and energy efficient as possible. Within that, we've learnt that resident-led estate regeneration and redevelopment from the Ledbury and the Tustin, and feel really confident that these, we could roll that out on the Aylesbury estate as well. We've absolutely feel that resident-led redevelopment is the way forward, and having people having a say in their homes and their estate and what happens with them is absolutely fundamental within that as well. And also the lifting of the housing revenue account borrowing cap means we can borrow more money to build new homes. We weren't in that position in 2014, and therefore the only way we could look at that time to redevelop the estate was through a partnership agreement as it was. We've varied that partnership agreement in the past, the most recent one being where with the first development site A, where now all those homes are coming across as council homes, so 581 new council homes, which should be finished summer next year, isn't it, Neil? Now, around that, we've got a bit of a delay with the energy providers, but we're confident that people will be moving into those new homes this year around that. So in light of that, we've been speaking to Notting Hill Genesis to amend the current development partnership agreement, and so the details of that will be in the closed report. If Cabinet are minded to approve that. So if Cabinet are minded to approve that, then Notting Hill will take that to their board as well to talk that through and hopefully agree that development, that variation to the agreement. In addition to this, this report also asks that we Cabinet approve a further just under £30 million for home leaseholder acquisitions. I think, again, you know, the original terms that we agreed with leaseholders were in 2012, and a lot, you know, that's 10 years ago, and we have to recognise, you know, things have changed, more work has been needed on the estate, prices have risen as well, so we're asking that more money is given for us to be able to have those meaningful discussions with leaseholders on the blocks that we do need to have empty for the current development phases within the Aylesbury on that. We're also looking to agree an additional just over £13 million for the amount that's already been spent on those acquisitions. We did have a budget for that, but we've spent slightly over it. So we just need to rebalance the accounts for that. So that it's asking for that additional money to be varied over to that, over to that. And also, really importantly, that we want to give the equivalent of home loss payments to residents who are moving into the extra care facilities on plot 18. They're not actually entitled to home loss payments, but they will be moving from their homes. So we're asking for £165,000 to cover those costs as well. I just want to say, though, in light of this, you know, we've come a long way on the Aylesbury. As I said, we've got the 581 new homes on FDSA that's coming through. We've got the new library and health centre on plot 18, which will be coming through and opening this year as well. A really great addition to the Aylesbury, as well as, you know, getting people into work and the community opportunities for young people on there as well. But I just think that, you know, this is absolutely the right way forward for the Aylesbury. It will strengthen our relationship. It will make sure that we're putting residents at the heart of everything that we do, and they have a say in what happens to their estate and to their homes.
Thank you, Steph. Michael and Neil, did you want to add anything? And please do introduce yourselves as well.
So I'm Neil Kirby, Head of Regeneration Staff for the Council. I have nothing to add to this other than it's clearly a massive step forward and allows us to develop that plan with residents, which is what we've been waiting for.
Okay, I mean, this is, there are a number of things that we're doing in this paper, aren't there? Including those that are clearly set out in recommendations 1, 2, 3, and then the delegated authority to negotiate this change that Steph has said. Now, you know, we're absolutely committed to working to do something that delivers for residents on the estate. And as you say, Steph, the first priority is to make sure that residents on the Aylesbury have great quality homes that they can move into on the estate. And we want to come to a renewed agreement with Notting Hill that allows us to do that in an even better way than the previous proposals, which were always positive for the residents, but we think we can get to an even better place on this. There's a detailed conversation we need to have with Notting Hill, and it's important to say that while there is a section here that's a closed item, we have closed items regularly. That's just where there are aspects of confidential negotiations. So, for example, when we're paying for the price of land or agreeing a change in the value that we will be paying to another organisation, we do that confidentially, because otherwise we would be going into negotiation with that organisation knowing what we were willing to pay, which obviously ties one hand behind our back, to say the least. Of course, everything will in due course become fully publicly produced so people can understand the good value that we're paying. Steph.
And also to add that I will be coming back to Cabinet shortly to another Cabinet with what that will look like and what the, you know, and how we will be working with residents on that as well. So this is very much the first stage, and then we will have a more detailed open report on that in the future.
Evelyn.
I'm just wondering, how have we been basically informing residents of the step change that's about to happen? Have we started having that discussion?
I think we have to get over the line on what's in the closed report, but we'll be, as soon as we can, we will be having those discussions and, you know, using that Tustin model that's worked so well, that, you know, on the Tustin estate as well on that. So the plan, we are drawing up what that will look like. It's just, we just need to sort of approve this and the board to approve it, and then we can go out to the public on it. Yeah.
And to be clear on that point, obviously we, the council, need to agree. Notting Hill themselves will also need to agree a change to the agreement before we can be clear where we've got to. But we expect to be able to come back with some really exciting and positive news for residents on the estate on the back of that change. That being the case, we're not agreeing these recommendations now because we need to discuss the closed report. So we'll do that in closed session. but they're set out clearly here for people, and we'll return to this at the end of the meeting in closed session. So let's go on to the next item, which is item 11, admission arrangements for community primary schools. Jasmine, would you like to introduce that, and we'll bring in any officers that you were waiting for you outside?
Yes, I am waiting for David Quirk Thornton, actually. I think he's coming in now. Yes. I'll just wait for him, if that's okay, and then I'll begin. Oh, hi, and we've got Glenn too, our expert. Is David joining you? Or? Oh, okay. Is it all right to begin? Okay. Welcome, Glenn. Okay, you have before you the admission arrangements for community primary school admissions. So I'm asking you to agree this document. So that Council, as you know, has a statutory responsibility for coordinating admissions on behalf of Southwark residents applying for state school places. So this is what this is about. Now, this usually goes on, but if there are any changes, you have to have a big consultation with the school and its community. So we have, and we are proposing some changes. So we know that London is suffering from what can only be described as a demographic shock. You know, we know that basically pupil admission numbers have gone down, and there are many factors. There are the drop in birth rate, the uncertainties brought around by Brexit. And of course, living in the current pandemic, we can see, you know, that we're looking at Zoom behind us, and we can see a lot of people have thought actually that they can, you know, I don't want to over-egg it, but, you know, significant numbers think, well, actually, they can hold a city job down and live further afield. So all of these things would be all right on their own, but mixed together, you know, has meant that our pupil admission numbers have come down. This is very serious in Southwark, but also for the whole of London, in particular for us, because we, you know, invest in our young people and our children, and we've invested quite a lot in our schools. So, you know, we want to do all to weather this storm. And one of the ways that one can weather the storm is to reduce pupil admission numbers. So if you do that, one has to do the consultation, and you have to do that fairly quickly, because you have to, it's not, you know, it's not in our gift to completely agree it, although it's in our gift to do all the hard work, but we have to go to the Secretary of State and ask permission to reduce pupil admission numbers. Okay, so having set the scene, where are we then? So, you know, there's an oversupply of places. So the consultation concluded, talk about, I mean, my team worked very hard, but we're absolutely used to having to work straight to the wire. So I can tell you that the consultation ended yesterday, but I'd like to bring your attention to supplemental agenda number 2. And at the end of that report, you will see the scores on the doors. So basically we can say that we'll be asking Secretary of State on the basis of this consultation that Ilderton Primary School, Dog Kennel Hill Primary School and Coburg Primary School will be reducing from 60 to 30 places. So that's the same trend. I mean, I do want to say for people with an eye to detail that there's a bit of an omission here, because we thought we had more schools than this that wanted to be in the consultation. And people will know that Ivydale wanted, you know, my understanding, we understood that they initially wanted to be in the consultation. And then, you know, there was a bit of, you know, once the school community decided that that wasn't the case, obviously we know that we're in the business of absolutely working in partnership with all our partnerships, not least schools. And it's not our job, and it's certainly not, you know, our want to be doing things to our partners and doing things to schools. So if they don't want to be in this consultation, it's absolutely fine for them not to be in there. Of course, you know, if they can make their finances stack up, then, you know, and they're confident of that. I believe in the case of Ivydale, they're at 90, the PAN's at 90 now, so they're feeling a bit more confident. Fine, if they can make that stack up financially, we'll have to support that. So, you know, that's to just explain that omission. Leader. So I think the only thing that I have left to do now before I open it up is and hand over to our expert is to thank you, Glenn, because, you know, this is like, you know, massive work, you know, and it has to have eye for detail, and you and your team are really across this in the choppiest of circumstances. So, you know, a big thanks to you and your team for putting your arms around this. And I think we're confident to say that I'd recommend this now, that we just pass this and we move it on to the Secretary of State. I did want to say, on the context, there are other things that we're doing, you know, about this demographic shock. But, you know, basically that's for, you know, another meeting, I think.
Glenn, would you like to introduce yourself and is there anything you'd like to add?
Hello, Glenn Garcia, Assistant Director for Education Access. Nothing really to add. The summary of the consultation was attached, and it said it broadly supported the strategic direction that the council's working towards in reducing admission numbers.
Thank you. I mean, you know, obviously having falling numbers in the borough is a worrying thing to have, and we know there are many reasons for that. As Jasmine said, the impact of the pandemic, we think has had a fairly significant effect, but also the government's policy on Brexit, we know has meant to many European citizens either leaving or choosing not to come to Southwark, which is something we're deeply sad about, in addition to the government's benefits policies, which have made it more and more unaffordable for many families to live in our borough. Which, you know, is just something that should not be the case in a country as prosperous as the United Kingdom is. But nonetheless, we're having to work through these, and really importantly, as Jasmine said, we want to work with schools and with parents to find solutions that will allow our schools to be well resourced and keep the very high standards that they have with, is it 96% now? Good and outstanding, 96%,
yes,
amazing achievement. Are there any questions that people would like to ask on this report? Alice?
Yeah, it'd be helpful if you could just say a little bit more about the consultation and the engagement with the schools and with parents as well, and what happens after this decision in terms of reassurance about that there won't be any negative impact on the schools and their children going.
Yes, so the schools what happened initially was there was quite an extensive consultation with schools, and the 3 schools listed absolutely wanted this to happen because it will help them to reorganise and to manage their finances in a much stronger way. The idea is that they will become strong one-form entry schools. So I did offer to speak with families at those schools. That was not taken up, but the message went out to all families. We didn't really receive much commentary back, but the school has been operating the schools have been operating as one-form entry for quite a time. So what will happen now is once Cabinet takes its decision, all schools will be informed. In fact, every school in the borough will be informed, and it will be posted on our website and sent to the Secretary of State as well.
And just to be clear for everyone, so this is not for intake in this coming September.
2020.
This is for 2023.
This is for 2023. However, separately, because the position was so acute, these 3 schools have also, we've written to the Office of the Schools Adjudicator to ask that this decision be implemented from September of this year. So that's a separate process running alongside this. This is more like a safety net, just in case the Schools Adjudicator doesn't agree with our position. Rare, but possible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, it's good to be clear on that point.
Yes.
So I had a number of questions. I got Jason and then Evelyn.
Thank you very much. My question was around staffing and what this may mean for current staff, and what liaison has happened with unions, if at all. Are you able to kind of shed a bit more light around that?
Yes. So for the 3 schools listed, they, as I've said, have been operating almost as a one-form entry school for several years now. So what this will do is give them the surety that they're not going to have 32, 35 or 30 plus children moving forwards. That in turn will enable them to make any permanent reorganisations within the school. So some of them might be using temporary or fixed term, for example, that could come to an end. There is also natural, resignations and so on that they would then be able to reorganise around. To my knowledge, there is no plan to cut positions as a result of this action. It's more about enabling the schools to take their decisions in a more planned and focused way moving forward.
And I guess just as for kind of clarity, will engagement happen with unions just to ensure them of what you've just assured us of, so that should it come to the place where maybe some efficiencies need to happen, it doesn't catch the unions and of course staff and their livelihoods by surprise.
Just to come in on that, the consultation with any staff affected by any reductions in schools is undertaken by the chair of governors, the governors and the head teacher. The council doesn't undertake that ourselves, so that's a duty on the school to engage with staff. And as Glenn said, these 3 schools have been operating effectively in this space for some time, so this just brings some certainty for them. However, it would be remiss of me not to say that the wider circumstances are very, very challenging. And we don't just work in this space with individual schools, we work with localities. And we do still have some very significant issues to deal with. So I wouldn't want Cabinet to be thinking, this is it, this lands us in a set place. There will be other significant decisions to be made about school mergers, about school closures, about further PAN reductions, because the gap between the numbers of children we have going to school and the places that we have is so wide, not just in this borough, but in much of London, for the reasons that the leader was mentioning, that actually, this work is not done with this decision. So our position is that with our own schools that we maintain, and then with the academy schools, the arrangements are clear for engagement with staff. But it would be remiss of me, as you're asking the question, not to mention the wider context, because this does not land us to a safe and sustainable place. There is more work to be done in this space. This is simply one part of a puzzle, which is going to be very challenging for this borough and much of London for the next few years.
I've got Evelyn and then Stat. Evelyn.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I know we are in a very precarious situation, not just in Southwark, but across the country. But I'm just wondering, are we thinking of alternatives? For example, like there's potential that schools will be closed. People are reducing the number of students they're taking in. Have we thought about ideas like amalgamating schools? Are there things outside of the box that we're thinking of to prevent more closures happening?
Yeah, very, very much so. The discussions with schools have been ongoing for some time. And in this space, the PAN reductions are either about numbers of applicants to individual schools dropping through the floor or very serious financial difficulties faced by schools. And that's how we end up in this place for this particular part of the puzzle. Already there have been decisions about, one school closure, and there's a consultation underway at the moment for a second. The Schools Forum and the Schools Partnership are actively discussing options and have been for some time, and Glenn and the team have regular conversations with them. There's a number of key players. There's the Council, there's the Church of England who run schools, the Catholic Commission who run schools, then there's a whole range of academies. So it's a very wide group of stakeholders, but our obsession, our focus is always the children, the neighbourhoods, access to local, good or outstanding schools. That's our obsession, to make sure that we can deliver that for our residents, and we can. Some schools are in a stronger position to merge. Some of the risks are kind of still sitting there. So, for example, the Catholic Commission and the Church of England have trusts, but they haven't got all their schools in those trusts. They've left some outside. So we have to work with them to see, well, why is that outside? What's the risks? Who's going to manage that? Who's going to cover that off? Some of the academy trusts have come together and shared leadership teams. And we've been really pleased to see that we've retained many of the excellent head teachers who came to this borough when we were in a worse place. They've stayed for many years. They've really shown their commitment to the residents of this borough. So many of the brilliant head teachers we have been here a very long time. Some are now exec heads, overseeing a couple of schools, trying to make savings on the leadership so that the frontline teaching is supported. So there's some really, really, really good practice as well. And we'll continue to build on that and always try to mitigate the impact on residents and on staff. It's an interdependency that's really really understood by us. Thanks.
Steph.
Thank you. I've just got two things. First of all, I also note in here that you're looking at English martyrs as well around that. So I suppose that raises a question, because obviously we've had St John's close, Townsend is consulting around closing, and now potentially reducing the pan at English martyrs, which are all within the Woolworth area. Given I've just taken a report on sort of the redevelopment of the Aylesbury, what would happen should demand then increase? How easy would it be in Woolworth to meet that demand, given two schools, one's closed, one's potentially closing, and we've got a reduced pan here? And the other thing I was thinking about Ilderton is we're doing a lot of redevelopment in the Old Kent Road. Should the demand increase on the Old Kent Road, how easy is it for then potentially Ilderton to step up again, should they need to do so?
Great question. Really helpful questions. Thanks. So the very clear steer we've been given by our cabinet member is that in all our discussions with schools, if any building had to close, and of course today's report's about pan, but it's in a context, as you say, but if any school had to close or merge, that our ask would always be that building is preserved for education purposes, so it could be reinstated as a school if need be. And I'm really pleased that in the recent closure that we were able to work with the Church of England to get that agreed, and their Director of Education came to Cabinet and gave that commitment. So it's understood by all the stakeholders how tricky it would be to meet future demand with the significant regeneration going on in the borough. We don't want to be closing schools and building schools. So a safe middle way would be, if we end up in that situation, any schools that we control, the policy steer is keep that building in use for education, employment or training, so it can be restood up as a school at very short notice. And that's the ask that we've put out to all other partners in this space too, and they've been really receptive to that. They get that. There's been a huge investment in this borough in schools. We're very proud of that, and we wouldn't want to compromise that. So there's a good understanding, a good commitment to that. So I think there'll be a time lag between where we are now and where we get to. It's still quite hard to predict quite how many kids we'll have and when. That's work we do with the GLA on a London-wide basis. And as you'll note, of course, parental choice means there's a lot of, flux between boroughs. The excellent schools in this borough see a lot of children coming from Lewisham and Lambeth too, so it's a shared problem. We work really closely with our neighbouring boroughs to make sure that we're trying to meet local need and respect parental choice. But we're in a very, very strong position because of the investment of this council, because of the leadership we have, because of the teachers that we have. We're in a very strong position to navigate that despite these challenges, and say very, very clear steer from the cabinet member that any buildings must be protected for education, employment and training to be restood up if and when demand increases.
Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add, Jasmine?
If you don't mind, just very quickly, I just wanted to add, I think great questions, and that's teased it all out, but I do want to say just very quickly, and that is, I am chairing a cross-council effort on this, and we have got representation. I can see Tim Jones sat at the back, he's driving our finance on this, no stone is unturned. We've also got not just children's services, we've also got regeneration. So we're all around the same table. I'm constantly updating, yourselves and the leader on where we're going with this. Obviously, we want to make sure that no stone is unturned. We've invested 200 million in these schools. There's absolutely no way that we're going to let them slip through our finger. If anything happens, we will hold those buildings in the estate, just to absolutely agree what David has said. But I do want to add, there's lots of activity, but last but not least, in a room with some politicians, I want to add, there's a political issue here as well. And I have written to the Education Secretary. I've said, that we cannot stand for this. I wrote a letter, and Lambeth and all our colleagues from across London came behind us, and we said, for heaven's sake, plug the financial gap. Tim did all the work and showed the Education Secretary how much it would cost to plug the financial gap while we actually helped education recovery. We're talking about, come on, let's help our children and our teachers catch up after all that loss of face-to-face education. What better way than smaller classrooms. Now, we've not given up. He did respond, but he didn't give us the response that we would want, So we're going to go back and we're going to invite him to come and meet us. The other thing is, you know, I'm happy to say that I'm very plugged in with London councils, you know, so leading the charge, but also the leader, you know, and his leader network. And also, you know, we are going to talk not just to other Labour councils, but actually this is something that is affecting, you know, all councils, including the ones that are, you know, a bit more closely aligned with the government. So, you know, I just want you to know that we're fighting this on all fronts.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Glenn and Dave, for the work on this, and thank you also to all the schools and parents who've been involved in trying to find solutions here. As you say, Jasmine, we're in a really difficult situation, aren't we, here? But part of that, absolutely, is about having less children in our borough, but a big part of it also is about a funding system that is reliant on having 30 children in every classroom, and we know we could be providing a much better education for those children if the government were funding education for 25, 26 children in those classrooms, and then this problem wouldn't be the problem that it is either. So that's why this is very political, and that's why there is a real need for investment from the government in having quality education for our children. But in the situation we're in, we'll keep working with the schools and the pupils and the teachers to try and find solutions that work. So thank you very much for the paper. We will then agree 2 recommendations here. So there is one on admissions arrangements and one on admission numbers for primary schools. Are we agreed on those? Agreed, thank you. We now have a related second paper that follows on from this, which is on the coordinated admissions scheme for primary, junior and secondary admissions for 2023. Would you like to introduce that one, Jasmine?
Yes, I'll be brief. Thank you, Leader. Okay, so it's a Southwark coordinated admissions schemes for primary, junior and secondary for 2023, and it includes obviously academies. The report speaks to the admissions for all maintained academies. Again, if there are changes, we absolutely must consult. There have been changes, and I think, you know, quite a positive change here, because we said that, you know, where parents are late for whatever reason, you know, to basically to register what schools they want for the admissions, usually, you know, they just have to wait till the end of the system. Whereas now that we've put something in place, which means that there'll be a cut-off date when we can go back with information about what is available for their children. So that's quite positive. I think basically that's all I've got to say before handing on to Glenn, our expert. But again, I just want to reiterate, thank you for all your work in this, because as you can see from the paperwork, this is just the report from me. But if you look in your appendices, there's a very technical document there. Thank you.
Glenn, is there anything you would like to add on to paper?
Just very briefly, it's a panel of the system that we use. The change is that those families now, when they do submit a late application, will know exactly when they can expect their offer to be made, and it will be over the summer, quicker for them, better for schools.
Evelyn.
I 100% agree with the approach. As a mother who's been stuck in it, nearly getting my application in late, so well done for that. Just a question, is it across the capital, or is it, okay?
Okay, and any other questions on this one? No, if not, are we happy then to agree the recommendations? Obviously, this is an improvement to a system, but the system is not entirely our gift, and I think it probably is worth saying, if we had our way, there'd be some quite substantial changes to this system across the whole of London, but that's not something that we have direct control of, so that is a conversation for another day.
Not yet.
Not yet. That being the case, can we then approve just one recommendation there for us to agree? Is that agreed? Agreed, thank you very much. So that takes us on to Gateway 2 Contract Award of Community Re-Enablement Services. Evelyn, I think you're introducing this one.
That is me, and I'm not sure who, Jeanette, I think is probably outside, but let me start the introduction to this report. So this is a Community Re-Enablement Service. This is a contract award, and Re-Enablement is an important service that helps members of our community to be independent by learning or relearning skills needed to be an active member of society. Officers have worked hard to implement the agreed procurement strategy, and I'm pleased to ask Cabinet to approve the award decision in this report. This report also confirms the creation of 9 new posts known as occupational therapist assistants who will be employed by the council. There is currently a national shortage of occupational therapists. So this is our own homegrown career pathway for occupational assistants to become fully fledged occupational assistants or therapists, and will support the council in recruiting and retaining occupational therapists. There was a query by some of my colleagues on apprenticeships in this contract, and I am very pleased to confirm that the provider has committed to at least 10 apprenticeships per year for the initial 3-year term of the contract, which exceeds the Fairer Future Procurement framework guidance. So really going above what we have asked for, and I'm really pleased on that. And Janae, if you want to add anything to it.
Probably the only thing I would add to your introduction, Councillor Okoto, is what's exciting about this procurement exercise, which could be quite dry, is that it really does speak to recruitment and retention in a sector that's really overstretched. So we've got the creation of the OTAs, which will support the competition that local authorities are in with the health colleagues in terms of securing really good occupational therapists, but also the fact that the successful bidder is looking to professionalise the workforce by creating all the opportunities possible to have formal qualifications for their existing as well as their new recruits to working with our residents.
Really positive news. I think I saw, Evelyn, do you have, sorry, Jason, yep, and Steph.
Yeah, thanks very much. Really positive. I know there's a commitment made by the successful bidder to recruit 47 local staff. Just to clarify, those are 47 local Southwark staff, not local in the broadest and widest pan-London sense, is it?
I can confirm it will be Southwark. Southwark means local. Local means Southwark.
In this room, at least. Steph. Go on, you go and I'll bring it. I see, Jasmine.
All right. Okay, I just wanted to say it's always a pleasure to think about the Re-Enablement team. I mean, from my days working closer to the adults, I really enjoyed shadowing the team and looking at their work, and it really is, a jewel in the Southwark crown, really. So I just wanted to say that. Having said that, I just wanted to seek reassurances that our existing team are going to be held and looked after because, basically, not that we're adverse to change, and certainly the team that I met are not adverse to change. They're always looking to improve, but are they going to be held? That was my question, really. And thank you for your report and excellent work.
So I can assure you they will be held. So the Re-Enablement team have been very much involved in the selection of this particular provider, and the workforce that work with the current provider, the outgoing provider as they will be, have very much been kept in touch about what's been happening. So we intend for the changeover to be a really smooth one and held for the workforce as well as the residents who are currently being supported by that workforce as well.
David.
May I just add, Cabinet, our thanks to Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital. The Re-Enablement service is a joint service that we provide with them, and the success of this is down to both them and the council stepping up in this space to deliver a really person-centred local service. And like you, Councillor Raleigh, I've spent time with this service over Christmas and New Year. I've seen them when they're really up against it, and they're simply inspirational, the way that they work and what they do. It's a really, really good example of the NHS working with local government to bring services local and to be responsive and go the extra mile. So the space that these apprentices, the space that these occupational therapy assistants will be stepping into is second to none. And I'm really confident they'll be inspired to carry on with their careers, to undertake their professional training and to land careers in this space. It's a really, really fantastic and strong space for them to be stepping into. So very, very pleased for them too. Thanks.
Well, it's all very good news. And obviously, a vitally important service that is there for people when very difficult things have happened to them in their lives, and it helps them get back to having a life that they've got much more control over and living the life that they want to be living. So really important and good. So we have two recommendations here, but we are approving this one in closed session. The reason for that is the closed papers set out a full detail of the bid that the applicant, the successful tenderer, has put in, and obviously that includes some confidential business information that we can't share publicly. So we'll be approving it in closed session, so we'll come back to it then. But thank you very much for all the work on it. That takes us to item number 14, which is the home purchase grant.
Thank you. So way back in 2007, we launched a home purchase grant scheme. That was a scheme that allowed people who, our council tenants who wanted to buy their own property but not exercise their right to buy, it gave them a grant to be able to use as a deposit to buy their own home. And as a result of that, we would then take back the home and either use it for temporary accommodation or put it back into our general needs housing. That was always funded by our social home buyer sales. They've significantly reduced in the last few years, and the scheme is still really, really popular. So we get sort of applications in, but not enough funding to be able to support everybody within that. What this report is asking that we make 2.15 million available from the Housing Investment Programme to actually sort of fill that backlog. We've got 63 households who would like to take advantage of the social home buy grant. We would provide them the funding up to £30,000. It all depends on number of bedrooms, length of tenancy. They would then go and buy somewhere in the private sector using that as a deposit. We would then bring those 63 homes back into either general needs use or for temporary accommodation. It's part of our wider housing strategy. As we all know, there is a housing crisis. You know, we've got just over 16,500 households on our housing list and just under 3,500 households in temporary accommodation. So it brings 63 much needed homes back into use that we can allocate either on that general needs or use for temporary accommodation. In terms of the value for money, the 2.15 million for 63, bringing back 63 properties, it's cheaper than what we're spending on right to buy buybacks. It's cheaper on delivering our new homes ourselves. And I think it's a really integral part of looking at how we can tackle the housing crisis and bring more council homes back into use for people. And actually the speed at which we can do that is pretty quick as well, Nick. So all this, what this really is saying is that we would really like to go back to all those people who've put a request in to actually sort of apply for the scheme, to say, yes, we can give you that funding and bring those homes back. And it actually saves people then potentially exercising their right to buy as well. Because once you lose it, don't you? Once the right to buy happens, we lose that property.
Well, obviously, this is a really important, effective way to provide homes for people who much need them, whilst letting other people have the home that they want to live in. So it's a win-win for everybody. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add on this report?
Only that in terms of value for money, as Councillor Cryan says, very good value, but even more importantly, for getting somebody out of temporary accommodation and into a settled council accommodation, that saves an awful lot of money, but in terms of getting somebody in a settled place where they've got children, they go to local schools and they get a job. We know problems of people living in temporary accommodation, just leading a normal life. So it's incredibly important, incredibly helpful. 63 is a significant contribution to that.
And of course, that's largely, often 63 families, so it's many more than that in terms of people. So, okay, any questions on this one? It's obviously a relatively straightforward report. I mean, it's worth clarifying on this one that where people choose to take the grant and then go and purchase their own home, they can't then come back and request another council housing.
No, so the contract says they shouldn't come back to Southwark to seek housing at a later date.
Yeah. Okay. And that's just to make sure it's a fair and good use of public money for everyone. Okay, so are we happy to agree this report? We've got two recommendations there for us all to agree. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. That takes us on to the next item, which is the digital inclusion report. Rebecca, it's for you to introduce.
So this is our technology and digital strategy. It brings together a whole number of reports that have existed across the council in different directorates and puts them into one place. And it sets out our ambition to ensure that Southwark is recognised as one of the leading digital boroughs in London. And by that, we mean that we are delivering a digitally inclusive society, developing the digital infrastructure and services that enable our citizens, communities and businesses to thrive. What we do in here is set out 5 key delivery pillars, which will set out a structure essentially for how we will deliver the digital strategy going forward. And those are making Southwark one of the best connected boroughs in London and developing emerging technology, tackling digital exclusion and ensuring our residents have the tools, skills and technology to participate in today's society, empowering local businesses, improving resident experiences and supporting our staff. And this report is also accompanied by the full technology and digital strategy that sits behind it as well. Richard, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's great. Thank you, Councillor.
Do we have questions on this report? There's obviously lots of work in here. I'd be interested to know, we've been working hard to make sure that the infrastructure is there for people to be connected in the borough and to roll out more full fibre broadband, also to work with the mobile providers to increase the coverage of higher speed mobile receptions up to 5G at the moment. Where are we at with that work and how do we compare to other boroughs across London and nationally?
Yes, so a good question, Leader. So from a low starting point about 7 years ago, and we had I'm sure you councillors will remember getting lots of complaints about poor connectivity. We're now one of the leading boroughs in London, so we've worked hard with Wayleaves, working with Openreach, Hyperoptic, Community Fibre to improve that situation in Southwark. We're certainly now one of the best connected boroughs in London. Probably maybe 1 or 2 above us, and nationally we're certainly up there as well. So, and that's something we need to continue to do. We know that there are still not spots in the borough, so we need to tackle those, and we want to improve the infrastructure that we've got. But we're very proud of the amount of work that's happened in the last few years.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Councillor Laurie and Richard for this report, really. I mean, it's absolutely right, you know, that we're at the forefront of digital for our residents. You know, they expect and they deserve nothing less. I did want to say that we have, on the youth side, we've just awarded a contract to the Big Blue Door, and that is so that we can, I've been working with Jason, to make sure that we have, you know, real-time information going straight to young people on jobs and opportunities, rather than a newsletter, which has a wide circulation. Now, you know, we're looking at giving up-to-the-minute information through information technology. So, you know, great work, really, and let's continue on this path.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see this come here for agreement. The report kind of notes there are 16,000 people digitally excluded in Southwark. I guess one of the key things when we're trying to tackle that is knowing who they are and why they're digitally excluded. And I guess some people will know through data and others and working with the GLA, but how can people who can't get online, how do we know where people are? Can you just talk a little bit about that, who they are, and if people can't get online, how can they kind of get in touch so that we can better understand what the challenges are to address them?
Yeah, and I think that is one of the challenges for us. So we've already trialled, for example, during the pandemic, we loaned out some routers to youngsters who are unable to access those sorts of services in their own home, or they might be doubling up with other people in their home and unable to do their homework. So we trialled some of that, and we were looking particularly at children who were in care. So we kind of identified that group. We're also looking at children in receipt of free school meals. I think that makes sense as a sort of baseline type level. We're also doing loans of routes through our library scheme. So I think we're kind of looking at it at primarily at that level. But over and above that, by all means, I think people should contact us. Please get in touch, and we will see what we can do. So our challenge next is ensuring that we get best value we can, either free or subsidised access to online systems, especially for our youngsters who may still be doing school work at home during the pandemic, or they're accessing their homework. But I think that is the next step for us to identify who those are. But I think as a group, I think those two levels are good ones to start with.
Thank you. I have one more question, and then I'll come back to you, Rebecca.
Just in the same vein, and I'm particularly thinking about older people who are digitally excluded and how we're supporting them to engage.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So two things I'd quickly say about that. Up until the pandemic kind of shut down a lot of the work of the libraries, we were doing an awful lot of get online courses through our libraries. They were doing like 1,000 a year. You know, it was a really impressive work. But we've also got online champions as well. So kind of train the trainer type situation, so that they can help people who aren't or are currently digitally excluded to get online. But I think what we also find, especially through our customer services front end, so people say they can't access services online, but very often people have a neighbour or a family member or a friend who can help them bridge that bit. But we're certainly there to deliver that. So I hope in terms of training and getting people online and encouraging that kind of getting back to meeting people and so on, I'm hoping our libraries will be able to recommence that digital training.
Can I just have just one quick follow-up question? I do recall what we were doing last before the pandemic. It was really good, and I think in this kind of current climate, where especially older people are more kind of more afraid, I wouldn't say afraid, but more cautious about going out into groups. Can we consider whether we can go to them? I mean, obviously we have a number of older people homes in the borough, a number of over 50 estates in the borough as well. Can we consider that approach going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to consider that. I don't know how that would work practically. Might be something we can do with the home library service, might be able to assist with that. But it's a very good point. But what I always say about our digital strategy is that this isn't neglecting people who either can't or for some reason unable to use digital services. We maintain a very good telephone contact centre in Southwark. We maintain a very good face-to-face service in the centre of the borough in Southwark. So for those people who are unable to access our services online, we will always maintain those traditional contact services.
Thank you. And Rebecca, do you want to have any final remarks?
Yeah, thanks very much. I was going to come back on your point, Alice, about helping to identify those people who might need further support. I think as we start to roll out more Wi-Fi to our community halls and to our community spaces, and equally as our libraries are easier for people to work in again, we'll be able to I guess, empower our staff to be able to have conversations with those people as well, and then find a solution that works for them, whether that's renting out a router through the libraries or being able to help support them in other ways to get the access that they need.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for all of the work on this, and both in terms of having the infrastructure we need, but particularly supporting those residents who most need our support to get online and have opportunities to. Are we happy to agree with the recommendations in this report? So there are 3 recommendations there on page 110 to 11. Should we agree those? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. So this brings us to the next report, which is Banksides Yards appropriation for planning purposes. I understand there are a few people coming to watch this item, so I'll just pause for a minute until people have been able to come into the room. We were just pausing to allow you to come in. So we'll come to this item. So I'm going to ask officers to primarily present on this one because, Helen, are we able to hear you?
I don't know, you tell me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful.
So, Helen, who's not able to attend in person today due to COVID-related reasons, but Helen, if you'd like to introduce the item, it's slightly odd that you're actually displayed behind me, which is slightly odd, but you introduce, and then I will get officers to come in as well on this. I know there'll be lots of questions about this item, so we'll work through those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to officers for facilitating my virtual attendance today. And sorry, I can't be with you in person. This item is a complex and technical report and proposes that the council acquires a temporary interest in 3 sites around Blackfriars in order to facilitate the consented development at Bankside Yards. The council has no proposal to have a long-term interest in the sites. There's no financial risk of the proposal as it is fully underwritten. This is a legal mechanism that the council has used before that will address very specific issues around the right to light in particular, and will enable the development to proceed without affecting the entitlement of affected residents to compensation. As you noted at the start, Kieran, we've received a number of late representations on the issue, including from ward councillors and requests for deputations. To try and deal with these and to clarify a number of matters, officers have prepared an addendum report, which I hope that members have in front of them. Among other things, this clarifies the minimum of package of benefits that will be secured by the existing implemented consent. And it also seeks to respond to a number of the representations, letters, emails that we have received over the last few days. So there may be some questions that people have on the back of that, but I'll hand over to officers. I think James and Catherine are with you to run through the detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. James and Catherine, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and then talk us through the detail of this report. As Helen says, it's quite a complicated report, so I appreciate you working through it for us.
Okay, we'll do the introductions. I'm James Oates. I work in the Regeneration North team and have been responsible for drafting this report. Also worked on the previous report. Last time we did something similar at Canada Water, making powers available for British Land to progress the project there.
And sorry, I should say, just for clarity, I don't know if David's looking for it. So the paper is supplementary item number 3 has got the addendum report in it. So if there isn't a copy, can we take one across? Yes, thank you very much. Carry on.
Catherine Reid, Legal Officer for Southwark Council. I've been involved in providing some legal advice on this report and also in previous situations and other similar situations where we've been asked to use our powers.
Sorry, I'm not sure how much detail you want to go into. It is a bit horrendously technical. It's
perhaps if I ask some questions and you can come back, that might be the helpful way. I suppose the first question is, why is the council proposing to undertake this?
We're proposing to do this because we've been approached by the developer of the site, Native Land, to make their powers, essentially to make powers available to overcome difficulties they have in bringing the site forward. They have been in negotiation with various local people about the scheme that they're progressing is large, very tall. It will interfere with rights to light. They've been in negotiation with a number of parties for, I think it's going back at least about 3 years. Those negotiations have stalled. And so to unlock that, they have asked us to use some powers, to consider using powers that are available to us. The justification for doing that is that the public benefit of the scheme obviously outweighs the impact on those rights owners, which is principally it's to do with the rights of light.
Let me keep working through some questions because I think it's important to clarify these things. So could you then talk through what the public benefits are, please?
The public benefits have been outlined in the report, but then they've been updated in the addendum report. One of the issues we've had here is the planning history is very complicated. There are multiple planning applications for the site, some of which overlap with one another. The dates of the application, of the different consents mean that policy has changed in the interim period. So the way in which some benefits are recorded or are realised or through the 106 package has changed. So what it means is, so in some of the, there's two main consents, one of which has been implemented and they're on site, the developers on site now progressing that scheme. The second main consent hasn't yet been implemented. So there's a kind of different degree of risk around what will be delivered. So in total, what that means is there's a kind of a set of permutations and combinations about what will actually be built on site and the benefit, the 106 package benefits associated with it. So what we have attempted to do is extract from the various consents a package of benefits, which is the absolute minimum package that will be delivered, irrespective of what happens with the various well, based on the consented scheme, but then adding in, as in separately noted, the benefits that would arise, the additional benefits would arise from the new consent, so that hopefully it is now clear in the addendum report what the basis for the decision. So it's a very large. Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Would it be helpful just to read out that package, the minimum package of benefits as stated in the addendum, just for people who might be watching it online?
Yeah.
So this is in paragraph 7 of this addendum report. If you could just talk through the main benefits that are listed there.
An affordable housing payment of at least £65 million, which will be subject to a viability review and indexation.
And just to check, when you say subject to a viability review, does that go up or down, or does that just only go up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There will be obviously substantial employment during the construction of the scheme, and there are commitments to enter into training programs to provide apprenticeships for local people. There's a commitment to enter into an agreement to procure a certain amount of services for the scheme locally. There'll be a minimum payment of £277,000 towards community project banks and a £2 million mayoral sale. There's an extensive sort of package of public realm improvements. Previously the site was it wasn't really open to the public. There were private offices. So most of the site, just over half of the site, around about half the site at ground floor level will be open as public realm. There will be a new east, west and north, south pedestrian and cycle routes through the site. There will be improvements to the railway arches and a new public square and public garden. There will be new public toilets next to the Blackfriars Station entrance. Lifts are going to be provided to the station as well. There'll be cultural spaces, including one which is going to be dedicated to the LGBTQ community, to deliver services around social, cultural well-being, support and advice. And the basic development itself will include a mixture of residential, employment, leisure space. There'll be a minimum of 489 new homes and space to accommodate approximately 3,700 new jobs. So it's a very large benefit to the people of Southwark.
Thank you. I mean, that's obviously quite an extensive list. Can I just ask how we've used these powers before? So this is a section 203. I think you mentioned in your introduction that we have used them before, so it would be just helpful to understand how we've done that in the past.
Yes, yeah.
There are varying situations in which we've used these powers, the point being that they are applicable where the council owns land. So in respect of our own development sites and our housing delivery sites, we use these powers quite frequently, and you'll be familiar with reports that have come to Cabinet before asking for you to decide to use them on sites that we own. Where we don't own the land, we are very rarely actually asked by third parties to acquire an interest in their land so that those powers become applicable. The most recent, in fact, the only time that I've been involved is at Elephant and Castle, and a report came before you in April 2020, and the powers were used in that instance. So the council acquired an interest in the developer's site at Elephant and Castle in order to make sure that Section 203 powers could be used in respect of that development as well.
And then we've been asked in the questions that have come through from residents and neighbouring landowners about the impact on right of light. And could you just explain for us the difference between this process and the rights of light legislation?
It's quite complicated, but if a property has rights of light, and I should point out that's different from daylight sunlight, which is discussed through the planning system. If a property has a right to light, and not all properties do, but the developer has identified properties in the area that do have rights of light. If those rights are affected by the development of, for example, a tall building next door, you would be entitled to compensation. The basis on which compensation is calculated is quite difficult to explain. I'm not a surveyor, I can't really explain it, but there are ways in which compensation is payable to affected owners of rights of light whose rights are affected by development. What the Section 203 process does is that it overrides rights of light. It doesn't take them away, but it takes away the right owner's ability to apply to court for an injunction to stop the work being done. Now, an injunction wouldn't always be granted by a court. The courts have to consider all the various circumstances when they consider an application for an injunction. But what the Section 203 process does is that it takes away the right for a right owner to obtain an injunction, but simply it doesn't take away their right to compensation. So they would still be compensated for any interference with their rights of light.
Okay, I'm just going to open up to questions from other Cabinet members. Any other questions on this paper? There's obviously a lot of information in the addendum. Is there anything in particular that you want to draw our attention to beyond the things we've just discussed?
I think the one thing that I would like to reassure you about is that throughout this process, we have been supported by a QC, so that I know there have been a whole series of questions about what we are doing, the appropriateness of what we're doing, and the advice, including taking advice on the most recent correspondence that we have received. And that advice is that what we are doing is lawful and appropriate and effective.
Chair, if I may, can I ask one further question for the officers just to explain in a bit more detail? Some of the representations were asking whether or not we could consider ourselves to be at the point of last resort in the negotiations. I think it would be helpful if they could just address that point for us. Thank you.
Yes, the Council has a policy for when it would consider requests to make its powers available for external developers. One of the conditions on that is that the negotiations with the rights owner should have concluded, or that all reasonable efforts have been made to come to an agreement. So one of the issues in the report, it is saying that in the circumstances here, there are so many people involved that it's quite clear that negotiations, genuine negotiations, have gone on with a whole series of owners, and in the case of 3, those negotiations have clearly broken down. The negotiations with all of the other parties haven't necessarily concluded, but in a sense, it's a kind of binary. It's a sort of binary situation. You can't. The developer needs everyone on board before they move forward. So the fact that we clearly have a breakdown with 3 is the justification for moving, not applying, in this case, that part of our own policy. I perhaps should point out that this is one of the issues that has been brought up by objectors, but we have had it looked at again by QC, and the advice is that in this situation, it's a reasonable thing to do.
Thank you. I just wanted to double clarify with this one. So, in terms of people in the surrounding area, this doesn't take away their ability to seek compensation if there is something that turns out to adversely have impacted them. It just takes away this right to effectively stop the process happening in the short term. Is that right?
That's right. It doesn't take away people's right to compensation. It simply takes away their right to apply for an injunction.
Thank you. David, since you're here, was there a question you wanted to ask? If you'd like to come forward and do that, we'll hear from you now. Please take a few moments and obviously turn the microphone on so we can hear you.
Thank you. Can I begin by thanking members for agreeing to allow us to address the Cabinet today? My ward colleagues and I recognise the powers that the Council has under the Town and Country Planning Act and the Housing and Planning Act of 2016, and the reasons and the potential circumstances why those powers may have to be exercised. The powers, however, should be used sparingly and as a last resort. The reason for this is perhaps best summed up in the recommendations that the Council's intention in inquiring the interest under Section 227 of the TCP 1990 is to enable third-party rights to be overridden. In this case, the third-party rights are largely our own residents who we are intending to override. We also acknowledge the conditions that must be met under the legislation and the principles in the Council's policy for implementation of the policy. And finally, we note that the consultation is not required by law. As ward councillors for the residents of all the impacted residential blocks from the Bankside Yards development, we were approached by our constituents seeking our help and advice when they received a letter dated the 25th of November from the Council indicating that they were considering using the powers under the Housing Planning Act, seeking questions and comments. Since that time, we have sought an extension on the time given for responses, which was agreed, organised and circulated a question and answer document, and have requested 2 briefings with officers, and have read the report and associated papers before you today. Our reasons for seeking to address you today are for the following reasons. Firstly, that we have met and engaged with our constituents, and they have asked us to give voice to their ongoing concerns and questions. Secondly, that despite reading the report and having received briefings from officers, there remain gaps in the evidence base and unanswered questions from our perspective as ward councillors and those of some of our residents. And thirdly, the decision to exercise these powers should be a last resort, as there are reputational consequences for the Council. We would ask the Cabinet to acknowledge these points and satisfy themselves that this point has been reached, and if not, to delay your decision for further information and or other avenues to be explored. Fourthly, if you are minded to proceed, that you put in place appropriate requirements to safeguard the best offers made by the developer and commit to ongoing engagement and transparency with local residents. The crux of the report before you are the questions about whether the conditions required under law have been appropriately met and evidenced, and the policy framework that the Council has in place for considering the use of these powers. The report references the key tests, preconditions, list of 7 considerations, and the Council's own policy framework, and infers that there has been a breakdown of negotiations with some of the relevant parties and references the policy requirement that bona fide negotiations must have taken place. Our concerns and questions in relation to these points can be summed up as follows: that the recommendation to proceed appears to overly rely on the conditions and tests having been met, based solely on the information provided by the developer, without seeking sufficient corroborating evidence to substantiate this from the developer and the other impacted parties. that the council does not appear to have explored or required the developer to evidence alternative ways of compensating or negotiating successful resolutions with interested parties. And thirdly, that there remain, in our view, unanswered questions in relation to the position of the residents of Falcon Point. For these reasons, we ask you to consider whether the conditions and policy framework have been sufficiently met at this time, and whether you should therefore reject or pause the decision for further information. If you are minded to proceed with the recommendation before you, we would ask that the council asks for and receives in writing, prior to the recommendations being implemented, the best offers that have been made by the developer to the interested parties, to ensure that they honour that commitment that they have referenced in paragraph 27 of the report. Secondly, that the council commits to writing to all residents in the affected blocks, updating them on the decision made today, providing additional information wherever possible about the rationale and the consequences of the decision, and commit to ongoing dialogue and engagement to safeguard the interests and amenity of existing residents. And thirdly, that a separate update should be provided for the residents of Falcon Point who have had little or no information from the developer and whom the council has additional responsibilities and duties for as the landlord of many properties. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You specifically referenced that there were some unanswered questions from residents. If you could just outline what those are in your view.
So I think from the affected parties' point of view, obviously they struggle to understand the suggestion in the report that bona fide negotiations have taken place. We've obviously received some updates from officers about what correspondence and actions have been taken by the developer in relation to those affected parties, but there seems to be some dispute about whether that is indeed the case for all the affected parties. There's also always been a question mark about the position of Falcon Point residents in particular. And I'd like to, at this stage, I didn't say before, I'd like to thank obviously James and Catherine for answering their time that they've given us as ward councillors and the answering of and the securing of sort of answers to those questions. But there still seems, in my mind, and I think those of my colleagues, that there is not an absolute clarity on the position of the Falcon Point residents in regards to whether they have right to light or not. And for that reason, and also the fact that the report basically the council seems to have taken the position that they've been provided with this information in good faith by the developer about the position, and yet they haven't really sought, or apart from the letter obviously that was sent out on the 20th of November, to sort of get them to, I think, evidence-base that position, and also to seek clarity from the affected parties that that is indeed the case. So I just think that, we don't dispute that there might be a time when these powers have to be used. I think we're just not convinced that the evidence base is there necessarily to make it at this time, and also that it should, and I think it's referenced in the report, this should be a last resort for the council, because at the end of the day, the optics of this do not look good for the council. It's essentially the council is appearing to stand with the developer and against the interests of the residents, and that is a difficult position for the council to be in.
Thank you, David. Well, we will ask some questions as officers based on what you've just said. So let me work back through those. Thank you very much for coming up and representing your residents for us. To work through those, Falcon Point, if we could just talk through the situation of a Falcon Point, please.
The position with Falcon Point is that we understand that they do not have rights of light in the legal sense, because the freeholder of the development site and Falcon Point are one and the same. And although the council is involved as a leaseholder itself, so there's the freehold, then the council leaseholder, and then the occupiers who are secure tenants and leaseholders from the council. So there is, the legal position is that because the two pieces of land are in the same ownership, that rights of light don't pass between them. Also, on the basis of the initial rights to light surveys, a lot of the flats in Falcon Point aren't materially affected. Those that are will have been contacted if it is considered that there is A, a right of light, and B, a material interest, but the belief is that they don't have rights of light.
Sorry, I just wanted to double check on that one. So we're saying, so for the legal reasons you described, the single land ownership, the rights of light is not something that applies, but then you said that there may be an impact on some properties. I just wanted to clarify that.
I think that the position is that they don't have rights of light, but this is being investigated, and the effect on them of the buildings on their rights of light is also being looked at.
But that's, and their ability, should it turn out that they're eligible for compensation, is not affected by this decision?
That's right. If they are eligible for compensation, either because we're wrong and they do have rights of light, then they will still, what the council is being asked to do today will not affect their right to compensation.
So the second substantive point was, have we received full evidence that full negotiations have taken place on this, and that they have reached the end of what's practical within them?
We have been given the, you'll appreciate that the negotiations are private and they're confidential between the parties, but we have been given access to a certain amount of information, including correspondence, copies of offers, some of the technical information about the impact on individual buildings. Part of the process is that the developer should explore whether or not the scheme can be redesigned so as to mitigate the impact on the right of light. And we have seen evidence that those cutbacks have been done. And on the basis of that, I think it is quite clear that the negotiations have run their course in three different instances. And I have to get the wording absolutely right here. 2 of those interests have threatened injunction, is that right? And the third has threatened legal proceedings. So, you know, the negotiations, I think, clearly have broken down.
And I think the point was made that negotiations with some parties are perhaps continuing, but what you're saying is that because those 3 have reached a dead end effectively, the fact that others, you know, there may be an amicable solution between those other residents, it is not going to get to an end game because of these 3 residents. That's the point you're making.
Yes,
yeah.
They've identified, I think it's 40 interests. Everyone has received an offer. Some of the negotiations have proceeded to the point where they have agreement. Others are, you know, along the path, but everyone has received an offer.
How many have agreed? Out of 40, I think it's very relevant to cabinet. How many have actually agreed?
So I don't have that piece of paper in front of me.
19 out of 20. 21 people actually have agreed. I just think it's really important to hear. Sorry to interrupt.
No, and thank you for sharing.
It's 21.
It's a more complex situation in that. There's also been there has been, I'm trying to think of the right words without giving away anything that we've been told in confidence, but there have been complications in identifying who the native land who should be negotiating with. People have made claims that they have got the rights to light and others haven't, and that has complicated some of the negotiations. So some of them have been interrupted by the actions of other people.
And I mean, I know you've already sent this, but I just wanted to triple check. And so the QC advice that we've had is clear that now is an appropriate time to use this, which is of course a power of last resort. But now is that point? Are we absolutely clear that that's the case?
Yes, and in light of the recent representations that we received on Friday last week, we approached the QC again, and he has reiterated his advice that what the council is proposing to do is lawful.
I'm just going to double check. And are there any other questions? Helen, did you want to ask anything else?
No, I think that we've covered all of the main points. I suppose actually just picking up on some of the questions or suggestions that were made by Councillor Noakes about ensuring that the developer honours the offers that have been made to date. It would be helpful to know from officers whether those suggestions that have been made by ward councillors are viable. So there were a number of things there about ensuring they honour their commitments in writing, and then I think ourselves as a council writing to residents to explain the decision if it's one that we proceed with today, and then also ensuring that residents of Falcon Point have clarity about the situation and are updated.
So can we have reassurance that both the developer, we will ensure the developer and that we ourselves, so it's to take these things separately, that we ourselves will communicate very clearly to residents about what the implications of this decision, if we do take it today, is and what it is for them. And secondly, that we will be ensuring that the developer continues to work properly with all residents affected around their scheme.
We will certainly do that, yes. And I also point out that the developer has already committed to stand by any offers that they have made.
Okay, any final questions? No? Go ahead. So would you like to come and talk to the microphone? Otherwise people are watching won't be able to hear you. Turn the microphone, just press the yellow button or the large button.
That one. Are we good? Sorry, I'll speak less. There's an underlying land transaction here to effectively give the council powers to the developer to override the residents' rights of light. I don't think that's in question. That is going to allow the developer to deliver over 400,000 extra square feet compared to what it would have to cut back if you look at all the diagrams compared to the residents. 400,000 square feet is what the council are enabling the developer to go and build. Today's values, that's over 600 million. I urge the council to consider its best consideration obligations to its constituents in the price it's charging for that transaction. That's and I request, my question is how has it assessed it and what number is it charging, please?
Okay, I think it's probably, thank you for the question. So I think it's probably important to separate out here in your answers and appreciate them for us. I think some of the things that are put forward are about the planning consent. There's a question about the impact on rights of light and then the specifics about the financing. So if you could answer those 3 points.
Shall I deal with the best consideration point? You'll be familiar with the council's duty under section 123 of the Local Government Act and section 233 of the Town and Country Planning Act to obtain best consideration when disposing of land. What's proposed here is the council acquiring an interest in the developer's site, holding that for a short time and then disposing of it back to the developer. And again, we've taken legal and valuation advice on this, and the structure will be that the council acquires a freehold interest out of which will immediately be granted a long lease of 999 years back to the developer, so that the developer will retain operational control of the site at all times. The value of a freehold subject to a 999-year lease is minimal, so that the council can acquire that for nil consideration and transfer it back to the developer similarly for nil consideration. And so the council's obligations to obtain best consideration will be fulfilled.
Chair, I think it's really important. There's 600 million being enabled.
Let me
charge nothing to the developer for it. So.
Let me ask officers to answer the question.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to figure out how best to do it. I think if I've understood this, what's being suggested is that we sell the ability to operate a piece of legislation. I'm not aware that we ever do that. I mean, I'm not sure it would be moral or legal. I mean, I don't know. I've just, you know, I have spoken to Mr. Cook before, and we did kind of explore this, but I never looked into it. But I'm not sure how we would ever do such a thing. There is a statute on books that says if you follow this procedure, you can use the statute, and that's what we're doing. It doesn't say anywhere that you receive payment from someone for doing it.
Well, thank you. I mean, there's obviously been significant understandable interest from surrounding residents on this scheme, which is why we've taken so much time on this item, more than we normally would. But I think you've answered the questions very thoroughly. Importantly, there's a really clear commitment there for communication to residents about this decision from us, the council, and about ensuring that the developer also continues to work to play their role in communicating with residents as well. Helen, is there any final point you want to make before we move to a decision?
No, I'm satisfied, given what we've heard this evening and all the correspondence that I've had with officers just over the last few days, that we are on strong legal grounds to proceed at this point and to facilitate the development. I think it's really important in communication with residents that they understand that affected residents are still entitled to compensation. That is not being taken away. We are removing the threat of an injunction being used to prevent the development proceeding wholesale. So that's the rationale for it. And we hope that residents will understand that and will endeavour to communicate that to them as a council, as discussed. Thanks.
And I think it's really important to underline on this that the purpose for the council using these powers is, as is set out in this addendum report, to secure the £65 million for affordable housing, the £2 million of SIL, the improvements to the public realm, the lifts, the LGBTQ+ community building as well, and so on. You know, that is our council interest, not the interests of the developer in taking forward their scheme. We just want to make sure that those benefits for the community are delivered. That being the case, can we make this decision and agree the recommendations for this report? Let me just find them now. So we have recommendations 1 to 5 on page 117 of the main report. Oh, shall we agree those? Oh,
are we agreeing it, including the suggested recommendations from the ward councillor, which was
yeah, absolutely. So should we add a third recommendation? We'll have to come up with some wording for that. The council provides full communication to affected residents of this decision and their continued rights and the impact on them, and continues to require the developer to maintain full communication with residents in addition. Okay. So that being the case, we're now agreeing recommendations 1 to 6 with that one added. Are we agreed?
Yep.
Agreed. Yep. Thank you very much. Sorry to, well, not sorry, I'm not sorry. A longer questioning than perhaps you were expecting, but I think a really important item that we understand why we're making that decision, that we've fully explored it. So thank you. So I'm going to take us on to the next item, which is Barnwell House. Yes, Barnwell House. And that, I think, is Helen to introduce again.
Yes, hello. And Matt and Paul there in the room. Just wanted to make sure before I start that they're there. Shall I proceed, Chair?
Yes, please, Helen.
Okay, great. So this item proposes the disposal of the council's freehold interest in Barnwell House, which is in St Giles Ward. This has been something that we've taken quite a considerable amount of time looking at and trying to understand the options. The current situation is that Peabody have a leasehold and have had a 35-year leasehold interest in the site. So the current tenants, there's 22 households there, are all Peabody tenants. The decision that we've taken to dispose of the property has been taken in order to ensure continuity for those tenants. And during the course of our exploration around the future of the site, residents were asked whether they wanted to remain Peabody tenants or not, and we didn't receive any expressions of dissatisfaction through that questionnaire. And then, of course, it also does provide a capital receipt for the council in addition to maintaining essentially the status quo for the existing tenants. All the way through the negotiations, and we're dealing with this enclosed report as well later on. Peabody have maintained that they have no intention to redevelop the site, but of course the council has included a number of clauses, you know, in the negotiations in case of that eventuality. So overage, and also a covenant to ensure that the site still provides socially rented housing going forward. One just small correction which is provided in an addendum is just to clarify that Barnwell House, the site itself does not sit within a conservation area, but it is just outside of a conservation area. And officers have advised that there is limited redevelopment potential given the context of the site. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Is there anything you would like to add? And do introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, Davis, Oh, thank you very much. Has been appraised and has been examined by the Council's Asset Investment Board. That was done several weeks ago.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? No, I mean, this is obviously something which is good, really important, and very glad that, as Helen says, that we've asked residents their views on this. That's the most important thing. But beyond that, it seems a very sensible situation that allows us to obviously retain social housing in the borough whilst freeing up money for us to spend on building more council housing in the borough, so or other assets for us. Okay, so can we agree the recommendations in this report, which is recommendations one? Oh, sorry, we're considering this in closed session, aren't we? So, and we'll come back to the recommendations actually agreed in closed session. But again, as I've said earlier, that's because this is about the value the council's paying for land, effectively in this case, and obviously we don't want to know people how much we'll pay, otherwise they'll set their prices at what we'll pay. So, okay, thank you very much. We'll return to this shortly.
Thank you.
Next we have the Ledbury Estate Compulsory Purchase Order.
Excellent. I see Marcus and Simon are on their way to that. Yeah, so I think, as everyone knows, we've committed to the future of the Ledbury Estate and to redevelop the 4 tower blocks where we had those structural issues and we just couldn't keep them. We've been working with residents for a very long time, since 2017. It's very much a resident-led project here around that. Now, we've secured GLA funding to start that redevelopment of the estate to provide new council homes for residents on the footprint of the Ledbury. And one of the provisos of that funding is that we need to be on site by September this year. So we've decided that the first site to develop out would be on the site of Bromyard, where Bromyard is at the moment, because that's a little bit further away from the rest of the estate and it's the easiest one to start on. As a result of that, we do have to have vacant possession to be on site of the building. We currently have 3 leaseholder interests in that block. We're very far ahead in negotiations with 2 of those leaseholders. We think we are very close, if not imminent, to agreeing terms with them. The other non-resident leaseholder, we're in negotiations with, and they're coming along really positively. However, to ensure that we have got that vacant possession in September, we do need to sort of start the CPO, sort of instigate the CPO process. I really want to be clear here. I don't think potentially we may have to use that, because the negotiations with the 2 leaseholders are nearly concluded, and we're in a really good place with the 3rd one. It's very unlikely we will need to use it, but we have to have this in place as a last resort, and we need to go to the Secretary of State now to enable us to have that vacant possession to be on site by September. So what this report is doing is just saying we may need to use our CPO powers. We're asking Cabinet to give permission to us to invoke those CPO powers should we need to do so.
Thank you. That's really helpful and clear. So, the main message here is that we neither hope or expect to use these powers, but because it takes so long, get them sorted out. Should we need to use them in future as a matter of last resort, then we do need to start the process now. Otherwise, we won't be able to have them in time. Should they, in the very unlikely event they become necessary in the future. Is there anything you'd like to add, Marcus?
Yes.
And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Steph's absolutely right. Two of the leaseholders are in the hands of solicitors now. One Simon's dealing with, and we have a structure of a deal that we think will happen. And the other leasehold interest there is telecommunications equipment on the roof, and we think we struck a deal with them. So our intention obviously is to be able to let you know in a few months' time that we're not going to be pursuing CPO powers and that we've done it by agreement.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Any questions on this one? If not, are we happy to agree the recommendations in this report, which are recommendations 1 and 2 on page 141 of the main agenda pack? Agreed? Agreed, thank you very much. Which brings us to the final report in open session, which is the report of the Overview Scrutiny Committee, Southwark's Climate Strategy and Action Plan. Helen, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, sorry about that. I'd almost forgotten about this one. Obviously, it's an incredibly important report from OSC and summarises the recent session that we had looking at the climate strategy and action plan. I believe that Councillor Wingfield has also circulated some further information about the report and the session to members of Cabinet. Contrary to maybe some of the media reports around the meeting, it was actually incredibly constructive, and I want to thank XR in particular for their helpful contributions and ideas. Essentially what we discussed is something that is already in train, which is the update of the climate strategy and action plan. We'd already promised an annual update of that document, which is planned to take place after May, so that we can align it with a new borough plan and also take account of recommendations that are made by the citizen jury that is currently underway at the moment. OSC have asked me to see what more we can do in the shorter term, so essentially between now and March, when they've asked me to go back to provide a bit more information on the action plan. So that is work which is underway, and I'll be updating OSC in March.
Thank you very much. And this is a report where we're receiving the report from Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and we will be coming back with the Cabinet's response to the recommendations in it in the near future. So are we happy to agree the recommendations to receive this report and that we will have a response come back? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. And that finishes today's meeting. We will now have a short closed session to discover the confidential items in the papers.